snack. Me and you gonna have a little chat about books.
Hi guys, I am here today to review two books for you, and both of them are older titles. They are both classed as science fiction and fantasy, or dystopian, which kind of comes under sci-fi, so I think that I wanted to review them in the same video. They are We by Yevgeny Zamyatin and Dragonflight by Anne McCaffrey. Now these are quite different books, so I'm going to do them one at a time. The first one is going to be We by Yevgeny Zamyatin, which is quite hard to say, I must say, but I've said it a few times now, I've been practicing. And this is actually the inspiration for 1984 by George Orwell, which probably most of you have heard of, even if you've not read. Now, I read 1984, I think a year ago for the first time. I'd never studied it in school, I'd never done anything with it, I just read it because I wanted to read it, and I really enjoyed the ideas within the book. I didn't enjoy the story as much as I wanted to because I realised it's more of a thought-provoking piece than it is a story for entertainment. It's definitely more thought-provoking, more interesting. And the same goes for this. It's definitely interesting. It's definitely a hugely inspirational piece for George Orwell. In fact, I would say that George Orwell massively ripped this guy off. This was originally published in 1928, but it actually didn't really see the light of day for quite a long time, especially in Russia, which is where Yevgeny Zamyatin was, because there was a state where they didn't want people to rebel. They didn't want people in the society to read something like this, which was criticising the state and criticising the government and the way that things were run. And they didn't want people to read something like this and rebel. So what they did was they suppressed it, and this actually didn't really see the light of day in Russia or anywhere else for quite a while, and it kind of surfaced in the 1980s, like 1988 is when it kind of became a bigger deal and more people discovered it and realised actually this is a really interesting piece. So the thing with this book is it's told in diary entries. We have one main character who is part of this very indoctrinated, very rigid society. Basically, he is given a number, and everyone in this world is given a number, and that is what they live by. They are that number. They do not have an identity, they do not have a personality, they are just that number, and all of the numbers together combine to make the machine. And the machine is always working towards being the best it can be for the benefactor. And the benefactor is basically God to these people. It's a really crazy idea. Everything is regimented, everything is structured, everything, even down to things like sex, is very structured. So people will choose who they want to have sex with, and they will give them a ticket and say, right, we're going to have sex at this hour, on this day, at this place. And it's really regimented. There's no pleasure, there's no spontaneity. It's very much a regimented, completely totalitarian society, and that's obviously something that massively inspired Orwell. Now, the really, really interesting thing about this is that not only did he inspire Orwell, but Orwell basically ripped him off, because the story in this is not something new to you if you've read 1984. In fact, it very much feels like the origin of 1984, which is what it is. George Orwell took something like this and he basically made it a little bit more readable, a little bit more fun, and a little bit more thought-provoking at times. I think this is a great foundation for if you've read 1984 or you haven't read it and you want to just compare them. This is a really interesting one to read. In terms of the writing style, I do think that because this was a much earlier written piece, it is harder to understand, not in a tricky language kind of way. It's still very easy to digest. I do think it has some big ideas, so you're going to need to chew over them in your mind and think about them. But in terms of the actual narrative, it's quite easy. The bigger picture is the ideas, and that's something that you will chew over probably. I definitely enjoyed this. I read it with Amanda from Amanda J. I'll link her below, and we had a great time discussing it. She enjoyed it a little bit more than I did. I was a little bit less enthused by it at times, just because I think I put it down too much. I kept picking it up and putting it down and not having the time to just sit and read it, when I did just sit and read it, I was really, really enjoying it. So I think it's probably the sort of book that it's better to sit down and just take it all in at once. Overall, I did like it a lot. I do think it has some fascinating ideas that particularly commented on Russia at that time. It wasn't my favourite book ever, but it was really, really entertaining and I would highly recommend it. So I ended up giving this a 3 out of 5 stars because I did really like it, but I think it does have some problems with like being a little bit boring in places and being a little bit lofty in places, but that's because I like to read for entertainment and this is more thought-provoking. So just bear that in mind if you go into this, but I did really like it. The next one, on the other hand, is Dragonflight by Anne McCaffrey. Now, this book I was really thinking I would love, and I definitely enjoyed parts of it. This originally came out in the 1960s, and it's kind of classed as a fantasy, but it 100% crosses into sci-fi as well. It's set on another planet called Pern, and on this planet we have dragons and dragon riders, and these people are supposed to protect the planet from the evil threads, which are these kind of mystical things that attack every so often. Now, in order to do that, they have dragons that they fly around on, and the dragon's breath and fire will destroy the threads. In this world, there's lots of little settlings and holdings where humans live, and they have, over many, many years, let their settlements get more and more greenery in them, which in this world is not a good thing, because the threads are attracted to greenery. However, there's not been a thread attack in a while. People kind of think, oh, maybe we're okay, and the dragon riders have diminished over the years into a much smaller pool of people and a much smaller pool of dragons. So where we're at when we pick up the story is kind of that point where everything's a little bit in disrepair and everything's a little bit less wonderful than it was 400 years ago, say, but we still have the basic elements of dragon riders and dragons and humans on this world. We follow 2 main characters really, but one of them is called Lessa and she is a young girl. She is probably our main character. She's a young girl whose family has been killed by an evil overlord type person who wanted to rule over their land, and so he's now doing that and she's been in hiding from him for a very long time, hoping one day to strike her revenge. And as the years go by, we see her come out of her shell and we see that some dragon riders end up visiting where she lived, and whilst they do, she gets up the courage and comes up with a good plan to basically kill off the person who stole her land. And this happens, and then she gets involved with the dragon riders and her life takes a completely different turn and she ends up going off with them. And I don't want to say any more because I don't want to spoil it, but one thing I do have a huge problem with is this book is massively rapey, and it's very violent rape and it's very nasty rape, and the woman, the young girl, Lessa, is terrified every time she sees this guy in the book from that point onwards. And I have to say, I don't really agree with the rape scenes in this because, like, why? There was no real reason for it. It's definitely not a book that is going to be quite light and fun. I thought it was going to be a kid's book. I thought it was like a YA kid's book. It's not really that. It's very rapey. It's definitely quite cruel in places. We have a lot of like misogyny of the men looking down on this woman who they don't believe can do anything right, and they think, oh, she's just being silly, when actually we all know she's probably going to save the day, as she is the main character. I definitely had problems with this, pretty big problems at times. I did feel like there was a lot of convenience to this story. I wanted it to be great fun, and it was fun, but it was also so problematic, like so problematic, and there were so many moments where I rolled my eyes and thought, well, that was obvious, and there were so many moments where I thought, okay, well, that wasn't obvious, but that was really, really flipping convenient. That should not have been possible. So, I mean, there's good bits and there's bad bits, and I kind of just wanted to give it a 2 stars at the end of the day because it's okay. It's got both sides of the good and bad, but it's not really either. It doesn't really fall on either side of that. And I just think if it didn't have the rape and if it was a little more complex and less convenient, it would have been a really good book. Because it has those things and it has them a lot, it's not just one time, it's many times for both of these things, it was a bit overly annoying and overly upsetting, and I just think it's probably not the sort of book that I would want to read for a second time. I'm not going to say no to potentially carrying on with the series, because I think the series apparently gets a lot better as it goes, and this was a pretty quick read, and it definitely was an easy read, but I do think it has massive problems, and I just don't understand why they were there. So this will be a book that I will be talking a lot more spoilery and in detail about on the Magical Space Pussycats podcast. If you guys haven't listened to it, then I'll link it below. We're going to be doing full spoilery talking about this with Chelsea from the Reading Outlaw and with Elizabeth from Books and Pieces on the Magical Space Pussycats podcast. If you've read this, I think it would be a great thing to come over and listen to it so you can chat to us. I'd love to hear in the comments if you've read this one, or if you've read this one, please let me know down below. If you've read neither of them, which one appeals to you the most out of them? I know that it's a bit older and it's a little bit different from what I normally read, but I really enjoy dipping back into the older fiction as well. And if you've got any recommendations of books that you think are similar but better, then do let me know. Which one appeals to you most? Which one have you read? Let me know down below. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will chat to you all very soon in my next video. Bye!
Thank you for watching my video today. Go pick up a book, then come back and chat with me again.